All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We've got Jay-Z's Decoded in front of us. This one's been on my list for a while. I'm really curious to hear what you pulled out of it.
Oh, Decoded is, it's something special. You know, it's not like a typical celebrity memoir. You know what I mean? It's more like Jay-Z's breaking down his own lyrics, like giving us a peek behind the curtain. You get the social commentary, the historical context, and like all the personal stuff he went through. It's really all woven in there.
So I guess that's why we're here, right? To kind of untangle it all.
Exactly, yeah.
He starts off talking about these 3 songs that had like a huge impact on him early on. Rocket, Looking for the Perfect Beat, and Sucker MCs. What was it about these particular tracks that grabbed him, you know, as an artist?
You know, each song kind of represents a different element of hip-hop. Like, with Rocket, it was the scratching.
Yeah.
Grand Mixer DXT, the way he was manipulating the turntables like that, it just blew Jay-Z's mind. And it's interesting because, remember, he actually started off wanting to be a DJ before he ever even thought about rapping.
Right. And he even practiced on this crazy setup, like mismatched turntables, right? I mean, that speaks to that whole DIY hustle that was so central to early hip hop.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You had to make do with what you had. Then you've got Looking for the Perfect Beat, which that one's all about the beat. You know, like it's the driving force in hip hop, the foundation. That's what gets people moving. And then finally, Sucker MCs. That's where you really see the lyrical skill, that raw energy of Run DMC, you know? It really showcases the power of words and delivery. So it's almost like each of these songs planted a little seed in him, and later on they blossomed into his own style.
Yeah, I can see that. It's so cool how like certain songs can just hit you in a way that changes your whole trajectory. Like they become signposts pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah, it's really amazing how those early influences can shape an artist. It's not just the sounds, you know, but the whole feeling, the attitude, what it makes you think is possible.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting to me. Jay-Z talks about how hip-hop really reflected the social changes happening, especially in the 80s and 90s. And he pulls out this Biggie lyric, "Look at our parents, they even fucking scared of us." And it's like, wow, that just hits you, you know? You could feel that tension.
Oh yeah, that line is like a lightning bolt. It just captures this massive generational shift. I mean, the world Jay-Z describes in the book, it's a world where you have single-parent households, everyone's struggling financially, you know, teenagers are getting caught up in the drug trade, and violence is everywhere. It's just a totally different reality than what their parents had lived through.
Yeah, totally. He even connects this to the fashion at the time, like how baggy clothes and those Timberland boots were less about style and more about practicality, even protection.
Oh yeah, it was about survival, about sending a message. That's what was so powerful about hip-hop in that era. It gave a voice to a generation that felt completely unheard, misunderstood, even feared. It wasn't just music, it was a movement, a raw, honest expression of what it was like to be young and black in America.
And then he throws this curveball, right?
Yeah.
He compares rap braggadocio to sonnets. Like, what? Where did that even come from?
I know, right?
Right.
At first it seems like a total stretch, but when you listen to him break it down, it actually makes sense. He's basically saying both forms, they operate within these constraints, these structures.
So within those limitations, you have to find creative ways to stand out, to be original.
Exactly. And he uses public service announcement as an example,
Yeah.
right? On the surface, it's just classic Jay-Z boasting, you know, success, wealth, status. But he talks about how he layers in these double meanings, these little hidden gems that reward the listener who's really paying attention. He calls them Easter egg hunts.
I love that. He's basically elevating the art form, saying, hey, there's more to this than you think.
Exactly. He's saying rap isn't simplistic. It's not all surface level. There's depth, there's wordplay, there's a whole history and tradition behind it.
Okay, so we've talked about influences, the social context. Now, Jay-Z mentions learning from the greats, and one name that comes up a lot is Big Daddy Kane. What was it about Kane that had such an impact on him?
Well, for Jay-Z, Big Daddy Kane was just like the embodiment of style and innovation. He revolutionized the flow, the delivery, the whole stage presence.
Right.
You know, Jay-Z actually toured with Kane early in his career, which is, I mean, imagine that, getting to learn from a legend like that firsthand.
Yeah, it's like a master class in performance, right? Just observing all those subtle details up close.
Exactly. It shows how important mentorship can be. It's about learning from those who came before you, taking what they did and pushing it even further.
Okay, so now Jay-Z takes us into some heavier territory with coming of age. He actually wrote 2 different versions of this song, and both deal with loyalty and betrayal in the streets.
It's a fascinating way to explore how his perspective evolved over time. So the first version, It's centered around this character named Bleak. Bleak's this young guy who gets drawn into the drug game by these older figures who are basically just exploiting his naivete.
It's that classic story, right? The lure of quick money, the status, not really understanding the risks involved.
Right. But the second version, the one he wrote later, it's much darker, much more cynical. It reflects the reality that Jay-Z lived through, realizing that trust is fragile and betrayal, it can come from anywhere.
You get this feeling of lost innocence, like the disillusionment that comes with trying to survive in that world.
Yeah. It's really powerful commentary on the psychological toll.
Yeah.
You're living in this environment where you constantly have to question people's motives, where survival means looking out for yourself first.
Now, let's talk about 99 Problems, arguably one of his most iconic tracks. He breaks down the whole story behind those lyrics, and it's this amazing mix of truth and storytelling.
99 Problems is more than a song, it's an anthem. It captures that feeling of being targeted, profiled, and just constantly having to assert your rights. That encounter with the cop, it becomes this symbol of a much larger problem.
He goes through every verse describing the interaction, the tension, the injustice. It's incredibly vivid.
And what's so brilliant is that he takes this personal experience, this specific encounter, and uses it to talk about something much bigger. Like he's talking about racial profiling, about the abuse of power, about the daily indignities that people of color face.
It's a perfect example of how he takes these very specific stories from his life and elevates them to social commentary. It's music that operates on so many different levels.
He's not just rapping about himself, he's tapping into something universal.
Yeah. Then we see this really interesting shift as he starts talking about his admiration for Russell Simmons and the rise of Def Jam.
The thing that fascinates me here is how he connects Simmons's success to the hustler mentality. Simmons, with Def Jam, he completely changed the music industry. Like, he flipped the script on the traditional power structures.
He created his own lane, his own empire. And I can see why that would resonate so deeply with a Jay-Z coming from a world where creating your own opportunities was essential.
Yeah, it's all about taking control, breaking free from those limitations that society tries to put on you. And that mindset, it goes way beyond music. It's about ambition, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about rewriting the rules of the game.
And for a while, he actually struggled with that, right? He was torn between pursuing a career as an artist and following Simmons's path as a businessman.
Yeah, he talks about that. A lot of creative people face that. You've got this passion to express yourself artistically, but you also see the power in building something bigger, creating opportunities, not just for yourself, but for others too.
It's interesting how he ends up doing both.
He refused to be limited by these categories, And in doing that, he redefined what success looks like. He showed that you can be both an artist and a mogul, a creative force, and a business powerhouse.
Yeah.
It's a powerful message, especially in hip-hop.
Okay, so another major influence Jay-Z talks about is Jean-Michel Basquiat. I'll admit that's not a connection I would have made on my own.
It's a fascinating parallel, though. Both Jay-Z and Basquiat, they came from humble beginnings in Brooklyn, and they rose to prominence in these worlds that often marginalize Black voices, right? Jay-Z was drawn to Basquiat's fearlessness, his audacity. He challenged the art world with this raw, unapologetic style.
And he even quotes a critic who said that the boys in Basquiat's paintings, they didn't grow up to be men. They grew up to be corpses, skeletons, ghosts. That's pretty chilling.
It's a stark reality, right? That speaks to the challenges, the limited opportunities, the constant threat of violence that young Black men face in America.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. But Jay-Z refuses to accept that fate. He talks about Basquiat's ambition, his drive, and it's something that deeply resonated with him.
Yeah. It's about defying the odds, proving everyone wrong, achieving success without losing yourself.
Okay, and that brings us to this really interesting discussion of success and excess. He uses Big Pimpin as an example, and on the surface, it seems like a celebration of a lavish lifestyle. But there's something else going on there too, right?
Big Pimpin captures this tension between the allure of the high life and the consequences of losing control. On one hand, you've got this celebration of wealth and pleasure. There's also a cautionary tale woven in there. Like the pursuit of excess can be fleeting and ultimately it can be empty.
He even shares that anecdote about smoking weed with Biggie and realizing that he had to shift his focus, like had to leave the street life behind if he wanted to achieve his goals.
It's a turning point, He realizes that real success requires discipline. It requires making choices that support your long-term vision, even if it means sacrificing some immediate gratification.
It's a pretty universal theme, right? Trying to find that balance between ambition and self-control.
Absolutely. It's that human struggle, trying to resist those temptations, even when you're surrounded by them.
And Jay-Z also talks about his conscious decision to evolve as an artist, to push hip-hop into these new territories, to explore themes that go beyond the braggadocio.
Oh, yeah. He talks about Beach Chair, his song with Chris Martin as an example. It's so different from his earlier work. It's introspective, melodic. You even hear vulnerability in there.
And he actually points to earlier songs too, like Regrets and Streets is Talking, where he started to touch on these more vulnerable themes, talking about his parents, his struggles.
Yeah, it's about growth. It's about refusing to be put in a box. It's about using your platform to express the whole range of human emotions.
He also gets into how he uses violent imagery in his lyrics, which is something that's often criticized. But he has a very specific take on it.
Yeah. He argues that it's often metaphorical. It's a way to express that raw energy, that resilience, the power it takes to survive in these really harsh environments.
He uses a verse from Bring It On as an example, and it's interesting how he breaks it down. He's saying, look, this isn't about promoting violence. It's about channeling that energy, that determination to overcome obstacles.
It's about empowerment. It's about giving voice to people who feel marginalized, people who feel like they have to fight for everything.
He's asking us to look beyond the surface, right? To see the deeper meaning behind the words.
Exactly. And that's a thread that runs throughout Decoded. He's constantly inviting us to engage with his music on this deeper level, to think about the language, the metaphors, the stories.
It's about recognizing that art isn't always literal, that it's open to interpretation.
And that's part of what makes his music so powerful. It sparks conversations. It challenges assumptions. It makes us think critically about ourselves and the world around us. So we were talking about how Jay-Z navigates, being this successful businessman while staying true to his roots. And he doesn't shy away from the hard conversations, like when he talks about racial profiling and harassment by the police.
Yeah, and it's powerful because he goes beyond just saying it happened to him. Like, he paints this picture of being paraded in a perp walk, even though the charges were dropped, simply because of his race and his association with hip-hop.
It's crazy, right? I mean, that incident really exposes the biases within law enforcement. And what strikes me is how he connects it to this larger pattern of injustice. It's not just his story, He's giving voice to so many others who've been through the same thing. And it makes you think about the impact of those everyday injustices, especially on communities of color.
It's like he's shining a light on this reality that so many people just choose to ignore. And he takes that same fearless approach when he talks about performing at Glastonbury in 2008, a hip-hop artist headlining a predominantly rock festival. That was a huge statement.
Yeah, it was definitely controversial. Some critics were like, hip-hop doesn't belong here, it's out of place. But Jay-Z basically used that criticism to his advantage, to make a point about the universality of music, about breaking down these genre barriers.
Oh, and I loved how he opened his set with a cover of Oasis's Wonderwall. It was like this playful jab at his critics, but also this really clever way of connecting with the audience, showing them that he gets it, even if they don't get him yet.
Oh, it was brilliant. And then boom, right into 99 Problems. That juxtaposition, it was so powerful because it showed that hip-hop can command that stage, that it can hold its own against any other genre.
It was a victory not just for Jay-Z, but for hip-hop as a whole. It proved that it had evolved beyond this niche subculture and become this global force.
Yeah, and speaking of global forces, he gets really introspective when he talks about Hurricane Katrina. Here he is, this incredibly successful artist, and he's grappling with his own privilege in the face of such widespread suffering.
He talks about donating money, but also feeling like it wasn't enough, like this frustration that he couldn't do more.
Yeah, it's that tension that a lot of successful people feel.
Yeah.
You're aware of your own good fortune, but you also want to do something meaningful, something that actually makes a difference.
And he connects Katrina to this larger pattern of poverty and neglect, like pointing out that New Orleans was struggling long before the hurricane hit.
He's forcing us to look at the bigger picture, at the social and economic conditions that make some communities more vulnerable to these disasters.
It's a reminder that real social justice needs more than just individual acts of charity. It requires systemic change.
Exactly. And that's what's so compelling about Jay-Z's perspective in Decoded. He doesn't just present these issues, he challenges us to think critically about them, to consider the solutions, to understand the complexities. And then there's Minority Report, which is so raw, so emotionally charged. It's his response to Katrina, and it's a pretty scathing critique of the government's response.
The imagery is so vivid. You can feel the despair, the anger, the sense of betrayal in those lyrics.
It's like he's giving voice to those who felt abandoned, forgotten.
And he doesn't hold back. He even criticizes the media's portrayal of the victims, pointing out all the biases and stereotypes that cloud the narrative.
He's challenging the dominant narrative, forcing us to see the victims as human beings and to acknowledge the systemic failures that contributed to the crisis.
It's a song that just refuses to let us forget, you know? It holds a mirror up to society and demands accountability.
It's a testament to his evolution as an artist. He's moved beyond those personal stories of his earlier work, and he's using his music to engage with these broader social and political issues.
And that's bold, right? Especially considering how hip-hop is often portrayed in the mainstream media.
Oh yeah, he addresses that head on. He says hip-hop gets blamed for society's problems instead of being recognized as a reflection of those problems. It's a really important point because it makes you think about how we consume art, how we interpret it, and how we need to consider the context.
He points out the hypocrisy, you know? People criticize hip-hop for violent lyrics, but they ignore the systemic violence that's all around us.
Exactly. Art often reflects reality, the good and the bad. And that's what makes Jay-Z's work so compelling. He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. He pushes buttons, challenges assumptions.
That makes us uncomfortable.
Exactly. And he uses his platform to spark conversations, to raise awareness, to push for change. This whole section where he talks about transitioning from the streets to the business world, that was really interesting. Like that meeting with Ruben Rodriguez, the music industry veteran, it's like he stepped into a whole new universe.
Yeah, it sounds like a total culture clash. He talks about feeling out of place, uncomfortable in a suit, surrounded by all these corporate types. It reminds you that navigating different worlds can be tough, especially when you come from a background that's often marginalized.
Oh, for sure. But even in that discomfort, you see his entrepreneurial spirit. You know, his ability to adapt and see opportunities where others might just see obstacles.
Yeah, and he realized that this meeting was a chance to use his unique perspective, his street smarts, to create something new.
And Dane Dash, his partner in roc-a-fella, he played a big part in that transition too.
It shows you how important it is to have the right people around you. People who get your vision and can help you navigate those unfamiliar spaces.
Exactly.
Jay-Z's story reminds us that success is often about being willing to step outside your comfort zone, adapt to new environments, and build that network of support.
It's also about recognizing that your past experiences, even the tough ones, can be valuable, you know, turning those experiences into strengths.
Then he shares a story about almost giving up on music. He had this setback in London, and he felt defeated. It's really humanizing to see that vulnerability, especially from someone who's usually seen as invincible.
Oh yeah, I mean, everyone faces doubt, even the most successful people. It's about resilience, about finding the strength to keep going.
And it was his girlfriend at the time who helped him through it.
That's so important, right? Having people in your life who believe in you, who support you, who remind you of your worth.
She saw his potential even when he couldn't, and her belief in him gave him the strength to keep going.
It's a powerful reminder that we all need those people in our lives. You know, the ones who see the best in us and push us to be our best selves.
It brings us back to those perceived contradictions in his public persona, right?
Yeah.
Rapper, businessman, activist, family man. He's got all these different identities, and he talks about that directly.
Yeah, he challenges this idea that we have to fit into neat little categories. He's basically saying, look, I'm a complex person, I contain multitudes, and that's okay, it's human.
He rejects this idea that his multifaceted nature is hypocrisy. He says it's actually a sign of growth, of evolution, you know, being able to navigate different spaces while staying true to yourself.
It's about embracing who you are, the whole package, without apology. It's about owning your story, even with all its complexities.
It's a message that goes beyond Jay-Z. It's a challenge to all of us, you know, to embrace our own complexities and reject those pressures to conform, to live authentically, even if it means going against expectations.
Right, and recognizing that our differences, our perspectives, they're actually our strengths. They make us who we are. They shape our experiences.
And they make the world a richer, more interesting place.
Exactly.
Now, there's this really emotional part where Jay-Z talks about losing his nephew, Khalik, in a car accident. And he channels that grief, that sense of responsibility, into Lost One.
It's such a heart-wrenching song. You can hear the pain in his voice, the guilt, the questions he's asking himself.
He talks about feeling like he could have done more, should have done more to help his nephew.
It's a powerful exploration of loss, The complexities of family relationships and the burden of trying to protect those you love.
And it raises this question, do kids sometimes pay for the sins of their parents? It's something that weighs on him.
Yeah, and it's a recurring theme in hip-hop. This idea of intergenerational trauma, the cycle of poverty, violence, oppression, it's so hard to break free from.
It reminds you that our personal journeys are often tied to these larger social forces, and that healing means addressing both individual wounds and those systemic injustices.
And then there's Meet the Parents, where he tells this story about the impact of absent fathers. It's not his personal story, but you can tell it resonates deeply with him.
Yeah, it centers around this tense meeting between a young man and his estranged father. The father abandoned him as a kid and is now trying to come back into his life.
The way he writes it, it's so raw, you can feel all the emotions, the anger, the resentment.
And the father, he's hardened by the streets. He struggles to apologize, to even acknowledge the pain he caused.
It's like he's trapped in this cycle of survival. He can't break free from the patterns that led him to abandon his son in the first place.
It's a tragic story, right? And it highlights the impact of absent fathers, the wounds they leave behind.
It's a reminder of how important fatherhood is, the responsibility that comes with bringing a child into the world, and the consequences when that responsibility is ignored.
Jay-Z's willingness to talk about these tough subjects shows his depth. He's using his platform to shed light on these complex human experiences.
He's not just entertaining, he's starting conversations.
He's making us think.
Exactly.
Then he gets into this idea of the duality of the streets, the way they can be both alluring and destructive. And he uses devils to illustrate that.
Oh yeah, he really lays it out there, that seductive nature, the promise of wealth, power, respect.
He talks about the mindset of a young hustler, that desperation, the feeling like this is the only way to survive.
But he's not glamorizing it. He shows the dark side, the paranoia, the betrayals, the constant threat of violence.
He's being honest about the cost, the emotional toll, the way it hardens you.
It's about survival. And in that world, sometimes survival means betraying those around you. It's a tough reality.
He doesn't shy away from that.
But he also acknowledges the larger forces at play, the lack of opportunities, the failing schools.
Yeah, those systemic issues that create this breeding ground for crime.
Exactly. He challenges us to look beyond those simple narratives,
Yeah.
to understand the web of social and economic forces that shape people's lives.
And that leads to this whole conversation about hip-hop's influence on young people, which is interesting considering how often the genre is demonized in the media.
Jay-Z doesn't shy away from that. He actually tackles it head on. He says hip-hop is often blamed for societal problems instead of being seen as a reflection of those problems.
He calls out the hypocrisy, too. People condemning hip-hop for violence while ignoring the systemic violence that plagues so many communities.
It's about understanding context, recognizing that art often reflects the world it comes from.
And he also makes this point that hip-hop can be a force for positive change.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about artists who use their platform to raise awareness, to advocate for social justice, to inspire a whole generation.
He's reminding us that music can be more than just entertainment.
It can be a tool for empowerment, for education, for change. And that's super relevant today with all the challenges we're facing.
This part where Jay-Z talks about staying true to your roots, even as you achieve success and move through different worlds, that really stuck with me.
Yeah, that's so important, especially for anyone who's ever felt like an outsider, or like you don't belong. It's a reminder that you can be successful without losing yourself, without forgetting where you came from.
He talks about staying connected to your community, to the people who help shape you.
It's about authenticity, right? Recognizing that your past is part of you and embracing it is what makes you unique.
He gets real about the challenges of navigating different worlds, the culture clashes, the feeling of not quite fitting in. But he says it's important to stay true to yourself, even when it makes others uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's about having the courage to be different, to challenge the status quo, to believe that your perspective matters, even if not everyone gets it.
It's about owning your story and using it to empower others. And that brings us to forgiveness, which he explores with such vulnerability.
Especially in December 4th. He gets really personal there, reflecting on his childhood, his dad, and how hard it is to let go of past hurts.
He talks about the pain of his father's abandonment, the resentment he held onto for years. It's really powerful.
And then he describes meeting his father and finally being able to express his feelings, to start forgiving.
It's a testament to the power of forgiveness, right? How freeing it can be.
He also talks about the importance of forgiving yourself. We all make mistakes, and holding on to guilt just keeps us from growing.
And that brings us to one of the biggest lessons from Decoded, which is the importance of focus and discipline. He's clear that talent isn't enough. It takes hard work and dedication to reach your goals.
He describes his own work ethic, the hours he put in, practicing, studying the greats. It's inspiring.
He also talks about staying focused, avoiding distractions, having a clear vision of what you want, and making choices that support that.
And learning from your mistakes, using setbacks as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's all about believing in yourself, even when others doubt you.
Exactly. Surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, who support your vision. It's about building that network of support. And it's a reminder that we are all capable of more than we think.
This deep dive into Decoded has been eye-opening. I mean, what really gets me is how Jay-Z connects with his listeners on such a personal level.
Right. He's not just rapping. He's sharing his heart. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah. He's inviting us into his world. You know, we see the man behind the myth, the human being under the icon.
And that makes his music so relatable.
Totally. But what's really cool is how he balances those personal stories with, like, social commentary. He's challenging stereotypes, pushing the boundaries of hip-hop.
It shows his talent, his vision.
Yeah.
He blends the personal and the political so well.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, I was really struck by his discussion of Beach Chair, his collaboration with Chris Martin.
Oh yeah, that was a game changer. Showed a different side of Jay-Z.
He talks about needing to push himself creatively, exploring new sounds and ideas.
Like he's saying, I'm not going to stay in one lane. I got to explore everything.
And it reminds us that music is always evolving, incorporating new influences, breaking down barriers.
And that's what leads us to one of the most important messages of Decoded, this idea that hip-hop is more than just music. It's a cultural force.
Yeah. Jay-Z argues that hip-hop can be a huge force for social change, giving a voice to the marginalized.
He's not afraid to speak truth to power. He uses his music to spark conversations, to inspire action.
It's not just entertainment, it's about making a difference.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Decoded, I'm left feeling inspired. I mean, Jay-Z's journey is a reflection of what we all go through.
The struggles, the triumphs, the constant evolution.
He gave us this glimpse into his world, his creative process, his philosophy.
And it challenges us to think differently about ourselves, about music, about the world.
What's so powerful about this book is that it leaves us with more questions than answers.
It's an invitation to keep thinking, keep exploring, keep applying these ideas to our own lives.
And to keep pushing for a better world, It's a reminder that the journey matters.
That growth and evolution are essential.
And that we all have the power to make a difference.